Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second Ambassador Circle virtual event. We were unable to be together in April for executive briefing, so we will be bringing you Carter Center program information on a monthly basis. My name is Ursula Hamilton, Associate Director of Ambassador Circle. I would like to introduce you to the rest of the team. Ann Venable, Senior Associate Director of Ambassador Circle.
Good afternoon and welcome.
And we'll be monitoring the Q&A room, so please click on the Q&A link at the bottom and submit your questions there. Sarah Matthews, Senior Associate Director of Major Guests.
Hi, it's good to be with you.
Sarah will be hanging out in the chat room sharing links and information. Alden Mahler-Levine, Program Assistant for Ambassador Circle.
Hey, everybody.
Please remember, if you have any questions, submit them in the Q&A room, and you can find our helpful resources in the chat room. Thanks, Ann, Alden, and Sarah. I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Our presentation today will be on conflict resolution in Syria and Mali, thought leadership and innovative practices. Joining us today are Carter Center Manager of Syria Conflict Mapping Project, Keator, and Senior Program Associate for the Mali Independent Observer Project, Knapp. Kate Keator joined the Syria Conflict Mapping Team in 2013. She briefly left the center to pursue her MA in Conflict Resolution at the University of Bradford as a Rotary Peace Fellow and rejoined the team as the manager of the Syria Conflict Mapping Project in November 2018. Kate Knapp joined the Carter Center in 2015, and in 2018, she began working with the new IO team designated to observe and evaluate the implementation of the 2015 Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation in Mali. Knapp earned her master's degree in international development from the University of Pennsylvania. Kate and Kate are not only colleagues, but great friends and quarantine buddies during this pandemic. Hello, ladies, and welcome today.
Happy to be here.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. Kate and Kate, as I will call you, can you each share with our guests a little bit about your programs and how you collaborate together? So Kate, Syria, we will start with you.
Sure. I'll first just tell you a bit about my project. So the Carter Center has been involved in Syria, some of you have known, way before the Syrian conflict started in 2011. When it did erupt in violence, the Syria team used its relationships to engage in political dialogue and support the UN. And then my project, my particular unit came into being at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, as there's just an overwhelming amount of information, just all of these videos on YouTubes and tweets going out and Facebook postings on everything that was happening. But traditional sources of information weren't really sharing all of that, and those in our space, in the conflict resolution space, were overwhelmed and unsure where to look. And so my team and my colleague Chris McInboe first started looking at the YouTube videos and mapping out the armed groups and who they were, and helping the UN identify who they should engage in mediation with. And we continue doing that to today. We now have over 200,000 conflict events inside Syria, just instances of violence. We have about 7,000 armed groups that we've mapped. And then during particular times, if there's a certain need around data, we've collected that to support either our own dialogue project or others. So movements of individuals, sightings of, we call it sophisticated weaponry, and other such things. And we just try to always see how our information could be used to support our work. So today, we continue to provide frequent analysis for both internally our team and externally, and also looking at exposed munitions in Syria, and a lot of mapping to do with that. So that's me.
Awesome. And Kate, Molly?
Hi. So our project activities began in 2018, but the history of the project actually dates back to 2012, when insurgents in northern Mali launched a rebellion with the goal to attain an independent region in the northern part of Mali, which they call Azawad. This rebellion led to a coup against then President Amadou Toumani Touré. And I'm simplifying events enormously, but eventually this rebellion and the continuing crisis throughout northern Mali led to the signing of a peace agreement in 2015. This peace agreement was signed between two armed groups and the government of Mali. One of the armed groups, we now call them ex-combatants or the movements, is the CMA, the Coordination of Azawad Movements, and the other is referred to as the Platform. This was the fourth rebellion and the third coup since independence in 1960, and the negotiating parties decided to add a new tool to the peace agreement that might help them improve accountability and hopefully advance implementation of the agreement. Mm-hmm. This tool was called the Independent Observer. All three signatory parties to the agreement unanimously chose the Carter Center to take on that role because of the Carter Center's reputation in Mali, thanks to its health programs, specifically guinea worm and trachoma work that's being done in Mali, as well as previous peace work that had been done in Mali. So our team meets with a variety of stakeholders, including the United Nations, the international community, civil society, as well as the government and the armed groups in Mali. And we work with them to figure out what's going well, what's not going well, and why they think that is. And then we take all of that information and we put it into reports that we share with the public, as well as the guarantors to the agreement and the signatory parties to the agreement. And we work with them to try to advance the implementation of the peace agreement through identifying blockages and creating recommendations for advancing implementation.
Awesome. So I guess, can you tell me a little bit how your program is innovative?
Yeah, absolutely. So the concept of an independent observer is fairly new. Other than our operation, there is one additional research center that's monitoring implementation of a peace agreement in Colombia. But this is the first time an impartial third-party organization was written into a peace agreement in Africa in order to play such a role. So the structure of our team, the methodology, deciding what kind of recommendations to make, who we should meet with, putting together all of this information and figuring out what would actually create the most effective independent observer has all been an iterative process. We began working in 2018 and we've produced 7 reports since that time, approximately 1 every 4 months. And these reports, they've changed a little bit each time as we figure out how to better reach the guarantors to the agreement, the signatory parties to the agreement, and the public, and try to create recommendations that are more specific or address information that wasn't previously addressed in our other reports. The independent observer is mandated to make recommendations to the parties, which is something that the mechanism in Colombia is not mandated to do. So that's something that for the first time an organization has been asked to make recommendations and to help push forward those recommendations. And that's been a learning process as well.
Okay. And Kate, Syria?
Yeah, my project is different, is innovative in a different way.
Yes.
Back in 2013, it was completely new to use YouTube as a source of information for conflict resolution. We got more of like a crazy look, like, no, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we were finding was because of Syria and how well connected Syrians were on digital platforms,
Mm-hmm.
and the rise of citizen journalism throughout the Arab Spring, platforms like YouTube became a wealth of information that provided a fidelity that was not seen in traditional news sources. And so that thinking that you could use open source information to support the kind of like the toolbox of a leader was pretty new. But it was also a way of thinking, and we've tried to apply that thinking to everything that we do. So constantly looking at our data or the work that we're doing, thinking, how could we think about it differently? How could we approach it a little bit differently? Okay, we are a support. My unit's role is to support our internal political dialogue and support external actors engaged in conflict resolution in Syria. How could we look at our data differently? And that's how it led to us working with the UN ceasefire task force and helping them use visual analytics to better understand the violation of ceasefires. And it's led us to today, for example, using our historical data, our 200,000 conflict events, to understand explosive munitions, because we realized that we had a wealth of information that we hadn't yet used in our conflict events that could be used for a need that we began to hear throughout our various conversations. So it's really trying to think about data and how to use data in our work, and what type of like shift in thinking do you need. Lastly, we also try to engage in communities of practice and thought leadership. And it's innovative in a way that there's just a real emphasis on it for us, which is not normally what programs and project doers do all the time, but it's reaped a ton of benefits from us. So we're members of NetHope's Emerging Technologies Group. We're members of the UN and NYU's Data for Peace and Security. We've contributed to talks with the UN Mediation Network and Cyber Mediation Network. And you can see the results of some of those discussions and engagements in the links that I think the team will share in the chat. And that includes the UN's Digital Mediator Toolkit, which I love because they finally recognize that there's a digital aspect now to mediation.
Yeah.
And also in the website that was a result of a research study by Build Up and Graduate Institute of Geneva that my team participated in, on how do you use digital strategies to increase inclusion in the peace process, which inclusion, we all agree, is really necessary to help make a peace process sustainable. And then lastly, also trying to share our methodologies and our approaches internally with colleagues. And so Kate, Knapp, and the Mali team has done a really great job of adapting our methodologies to their context. If you want to tell them a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our data work actually started a little bit differently. In 2018, when I first came on board, I am one of the people on our team that's responsible for our team security. We have three consultants and a local staff that are on the ground in Bamako at all times. And one of the most challenging aspects of my job is knowing what's happening on the ground at all times, so that in case something happens, we can react and we can be a responsible team. So initially, when I first came on board, I reached out to Kate, who I happen to know personally. I knew she was doing all of this really great work, and reached out to her and her team and said, I would really like to use that to start tracking conflict events in Mali. Our team was traveling, they're not only in Bamako, but they're traveling to the northern part of Mali, which is where the insurgency began in 2012. And at this point in time, that region, as well as central Mali, is also becoming a bit overrun by violent extremist organizations such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. And it's really important that we know what's happening with those actors. So I reached out to Kate and her team, and she helped us set up we call it a dashboard. Essentially an interactive screen that helps you figure out what's happening where, and who was responsible, and who was it targeting, and what date did that occur. So this data, it's open source data that we receive. Anybody could access it. It's available online. And we've spoken to the group who creates that data to learn more about their sources and to figure out how comfortable they are with the data and the events that they're reporting. So that was how it began. About 6 months ago, we started working together because we want to have a better approach to not only security, but to program activities, especially in the face of coronavirus. Being able to understand what's happening on the ground without necessarily having to be there, without having to travel to northern Mali, when that's not really possible right now. It's really critical in understanding and getting a full picture of what's going on. So we again reached out to Kate and her team, and they are helping us create a database, our very own database that will be based off the same open source data, but we'll be able to contextualize and reclassify the information to make it suit our project and our data questions better. So that's currently in process at the moment, but we are hopeful that that will be up and running shortly, and that we'll be able to use that to help us formulate recommendations, help us figure out where we have other programs in Mali as well. So this won't only be useful for the independent observers work, but also for our health programs or for our peace health work in Mali. Understanding where inaccessible areas are due to conflict or due to floodplains, understanding where certain cases of guinea worm are, and being able to map all of that and show the overlays of the various data could be project changing.
Awesome. So, and also they can definitely find the information for the dashboard in our chat room. We are sharing that link for them, so they will be able to see that. So Kate, Molly, if you don't mind, I do have a question for you. What is the difference between a signature and a guarantor in this case for you?
That's a great question. So a signatory party to the agreement, it's one of the three parties who actually signed the accord. So we have the CMA, which is the one that I mentioned in the beginning, the coordination of Azawad movements. And one of the groups within that coalition was actually the one who initially created Azawad, who said, we've created it, we've done our job, this is Azawad, we stake our claim. So they were really important to be included in the peace agreement, and they're one of the signatory parties. We also, another signatory party is the Platform of June 14th movements. It's another armed group coalition that played a major role in the rebellion. So those two armed coalitions signed the peace agreement as well as the government of Mali. And the three of them are mostly responsible for the implementation of the agreement. However, guarantors to the agreement, in many peace processes, there are external parties, especially international parties, that have a stake in the conflict, or rather in the peace. And those parties have agreed to help guarantee that the accord is implemented. So there are some times that we'll make recommendations that don't necessarily respond to one of the signatory parties themselves, but it's more for the guarantors of the agreement to say, you can be doing this, and that would help with the implementation of the agreement.
Awesome. So Kate, Syria, let me ask you this, and it's actually for both of you, but I want to start with you, Kate. Syria, how's your work in Syria and in Mali influenced by the positions the U.S. is taking?
Good question. While we are a American-based NGO, I'll speak at least for the Syria team.
Yes. We
don't act as a arm of the U.S. government. Sometimes we're seen that way. Back when Obama was president, we'd meet with like armed group leaders and it's like, yeah, so go tell the White House, go tell Obama.
Yeah.
Don't work there. Don't really. While maybe certain U.S. policies do affect how we can access key stakeholders, because you're supposed to talk to all sides of a conflict. And while U.S. military actions may restrict access to certain areas that we used to have access to, we really aim not to let U.S. policies, we don't let U.S. policies dictate what we do. There's times that U.S. policy is not supporting peace and actually further conflict. I don't know for you if it's a little bit different.
I would say it's exactly the same. And that's something that it's a fine and diplomatic balance that you have to walk working for President Carter's organization, because people do see President Carter and his organization as an extension of the U.S. government in most places that I have worked. So it is a challenge at times, but I think for our work especially, we're an independent observer. So one of the key parts of our mandate is that we have to be impartial. We have to be a complete third party. We can't take sides with anybody, and that includes the international community or members of the international community. So we are very careful to maintain our impartiality. We do meet with members of the State Department or people in the embassies in Mali itself. We are interested in their perspective, but we take their perspective the same as we would take, somebody from an embassy in Niger or in Slovakia. It's another colleague for us.
And just to say that impartiality that you're talking about too, but it takes trust and time. And with conflict resolution, which can be frustrating for program people, let alone I'm sure for donors, is that it's a long-term game. That we can walk in and be like, and resolved, go. So part of us being effective is taking time to show the actors in a conflict that we are not acting as a wing of an American foreign policy, but as a third party collaborator, coordinator, observer, so on and so forth. And I think in the Syrian context, we already had a bit of a leg up because we were there, but our presence in Syria before 2011 was actually somewhat aligned with the U.S. government in terms of helping. We were working with the U.S. government to help engage in a particular way. So it took a couple of years to build that trust as us being a convener. We we gather and we get people to talk about particular political issues in Syria that are a roadblock to the cessation of violence. So yeah, that it takes a long time to not be seen as a U.S. foreign policy representative.
Definitely, for sure. So I have a question for you, Kate Molly, and this comes from John Johnson. What role does an independent observer organization play in the current situation in Mali?
So current situation, I'm wondering if he's referring to the coup that just took place or to the ongoing peace.
So he's pretty much saying trying to support the disposed government of Keator or steer the military toward a fair election, good caretaker government.
Okay. Well,
and if you want to talk about a little bit about what just happened last week, that would be also great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Two things in there.
So, I'll start by saying our role hasn't changed. We were mandated to observe the implementation of the 2015 peace agreement, and that is our role. We are not there to be monitoring or observing the transitional government or the current process. However, of course, that will impact the implementation of the peace agreement. So I can give an overview, and I'll try to make it brief. For those of you who don't know, there have been protests that have been erupting in Mali since June. There are a number of reasons for the protests, many social and economic triggers, but the final trigger, or at least what the people have seen as the final trigger, is that there were legislative elections held in April, and the Constitutional Court overturned 12 seats in those elections in favor of the presidential majority party. The people took to the streets. There were multiple coalitions, and I'm talking tens of thousands of people in the streets protesting. There were not very many people who were injured, or it was mostly a peaceful protest. However, the used to be head of the Islamic Council came out in favor of the resignation of President Keita, and was used as kind of a motivator or a figurehead of this protest process that we've been seeing for the past few months. And so apparently separately, the military officers, which separates that from the 2012 coup. The 2012 coup was led by a bunch of more low-level military, and this coup was led by military officers, which gave them a little bit more authority. They were able to come in, and they arrested or detained several of the high-level ministers. They detained the entire succession for President Keita before they came and removed President Keita and took him back to the military base. It was very smart.
Very smart.
It was very strategic. They had a great deal of, it seems that a great deal of thought had gone into the process and how they were going to enact the coup. Coup is also a word that's not, some people are calling it a coup. Some people are calling it a guided resignation. Some people are calling it like a putsch, which is kind of a level below a coup. But President Keita resigned the night that he was detained. Resigned of his own accord without force is the message that given on the news on the state-run TV station. And so obviously this is going to impact our work. It's going to impact the peace agreement because one of the three signatory parties is now completely turned over. We have a junta, which is a military body governing the country right now. A transition government isn't yet in place. They're still trying to negotiate how long that transition process might take. ECOWAS, which is the West African kind of bloc, kind of like the African Union, but a West African bloc, they are calling for a 12-month transition period. And the transition leaders would not be allowed to run in the next elections. The M5, which is a coalition that was kind of leading the protests, and that was the one that was led by the religious leader who was the figurehead of those processes. He said maybe 18 to 24 months might be more doable. There's also been a 3-year transition process that has been kind of tossed around. So everything is very up in the air right now. We're not sure how it's going to really interact with the peace agreement. As of right now, the military officers have said that they would be willing to work with the armed groups, that they're interested in continuing the process for the implementation of the peace agreement. But everything is still to be seen at this point in time.
And so pretty much you're getting updates and different information on a daily basis.
Yes.
Hourly.
Hourly.
Hourly. Okay.
We're getting a lot of our information. I mean, actually the most up-to-date information is coming from Twitter.
Okay.
So we use social media as well to monitor what's going on the ground. Twitter, as long as you know which sources are credible, is the most up-to-date information. We also, obviously, with our team on the ground, they have wonderful connections, and they've been reaching out to as many people as possible to get the most up-to-date information. So it's coming from email, it's coming from WhatsApp, it's coming from phone calls. I mean, we're swimming in information right now. But
now, let me ask you, is the Twitter information something that we could share with our supporters, or?
To be honest, I follow a bunch of accounts. And they're mostly in French, but I can share a list of the accounts that I follow that we find to be credible.
Okay.
and if anybody is interested in keeping up with that process, then
That would be awesome. That's something that we can share with them after this event. So that would be great. So let me ask both of you ladies as well. How has COVID-19 impacted your work? So Kate, Syria, if you want to
Yeah,
jump in.
definitely. It's there in terms of the programming. It's stopped us from traveling. Which has been an integral part in relationship building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could have been impacted more, I don't say negatively, but in a harder way if we didn't also have a data component and analytical component. Because we're based in Lebanon and the US, a lot of times we're sending emails, we're having calls, but then especially for a field officer, he's also out and about, always meeting people, and then we're flying over there a couple times or more a year to meet with people. And so that in person really helps solidify those relationships and build that trust. But we still have the data to anchor conversations and the trust of many to convene people. So it's just really forced us to, obviously, like many of us, rely more on digital technologies and invest more in trust building in unique different ways, whether it's through analysis or through one-on-one meetings. And then just one other thing too, it's for Syria, to me, it's highlighted the effects of conflict, like it has in the US in terms of, it takes those cracks and shines a light on it. In Syria. Conflict makes dealing with COVID worse in Syria. Seeing how the government responds, seeing how armed groups respond, seeing how certain authorities operating in Syria are responding, identifies political power plays, positioning, and if what they're saying is aligning with what they're doing. It also just provides an interesting insight into the political work that we've been doing.
And Kate, Molly, as far as COVID-19 for you?
Honestly, I don't think it has impacted our work very much. There, again, with the same travel restrictions, that's one of the biggest ways. However, we have a field office. We have a team on the ground in Bamako. And the cases in Bamako are still under 3,000 total confirmed cases.
Okay.
So, or in Mali, in the whole of Mali. So it hasn't affected them, and that's not to say there aren't more cases. Many people there don't have access to healthcare, so it's not a cut and dry 3,000. But it hasn't impacted the communities there in a similar way that it has impacted us here. I would say that mostly not being able to travel. So I'm typically based out of Atlanta. The associate director and manager of the project is John Goodman. He's based in France. And the special advisor to our project, she is retired ambassador to Niger, Bisa Williams. She's based in Washington, D.C. Very important information. I probably should have mentioned that about 30 minutes ago. But the three of us haven't been able to travel. So John and Bisa especially, they're used to being on the ground. They're used to interacting with our stakeholders and cementing those relationships. Relationships with the international community, especially ministries of foreign affairs that we interact with fairly regularly. We haven't been able to meet in person. However, the majority of our activities are meetings. So we can still hold those meetings and reports virtually. So our activities and the product of our work hasn't been greatly impacted. We published our last report in April. So about a month after COVID had really began. And then where we're hopefully going to be publishing another one within the next month. So yeah, our activities are pretty on track, and it hasn't been as detrimental as it could have been.
So before COVID though, how often were both of you on the ground? So were you traveling a lot, Kate, Molly? I know I'm always traveling, so we were missing one another. So yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So when the project first started, I was there for the better part of 6 or 8 months. And then I started kind of stepping down my travel a bit, and John and Bisa started stepping theirs up. So every 6 to 8 weeks, they would go and check in. There's a monthly meeting that's held, which is the, trying to think of it in English, the follow-up committee to the agreement. And that's held once a month, or it was held once a month until protests, COVID, and coup. Just a few things going on in Mali. So they would always go out. Somebody would always be there for that meeting. That meeting was typically 30 to 40 people. All of the signatory parties would attend, the United Nations, the guarantors, and we would be there as well. And that was where it was a monthly check-in. So somebody was always there for that, and that hasn't been happening. But yeah, I would say every few weeks, the 3 of us was on the ground.
Okay.
Here's the same for my team as well.
Same for your team? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a meeting where you can, in the regions around Syria, or in Syria if possible, meeting with European capitals, Western leaders, so on and so forth, and as well as the community practice, the sharing of information, the collaboration, just jumping around wherever you can. So my field officer, part of his job is the Syria team's field officer, excuse me, part of his job is just to meet with people. Every month he's going from where he's based in Beirut to Istanbul or to the capitals, and then I'm filling in the rest. So it's been strange to not have jet lag for the last 5 months. I'm very used to jet lag.
So let me ask you this, Kate, Syria. I have a question from Richard Brown. In Syria, I understand that Russia is heavily involved on the ground. How is this impacting the Carter Center's approach?
It hasn't changed anything.
Okay.
Russia was involved Russia's been involved in the Syrian conflict since almost the beginning. They got involved very publicly, in a very militaristic way in 2015 when they started bombing Aleppo in the name of killing ISIS fighters. And we had been engaging with all sides, and including Russian representatives. It was a little awkward when 4 days after Russia started its bombing, we actually were convening a meeting of Syrian armed group leaders, UN representatives from both the special envoy as well as UN women, Western diplomats, and a Russian representative. And the giant elephant in the room was like, so you're Russia, you're bombing all of the fighters of the armed group leaders that are sitting a few seats down from you. So let's chat. So yeah, we've continued to engage with Russia, connect Russia with other armed group leaders. It's constantly balancing everyone else's interests as well. The UN ceasefire task force that we helped, that we contributed to, was chaired by Russia, and it's just, you just see a lot of political dynamics get carried out there. Sure.
Okay, all right. So Kate, Molly, I have a question for you from someone else. Many groups across African countries are causing a variety of insecurity situations and attempts at overthrowing governments. Some of those have been Al-Qaeda and Daesh connections. Is that the case in Mali?
Yes.
Okay.
Short answer is yes. So there have been, well, during the coup, the first coup, the 2012 coup, it's not
Clarify
the
that.
first,
Yeah.
not the first coup, but the 2012
Most
coup.
recent coup in this coup.
There have been a lot of coups. In the 2012 coup, the HCUA, the High Council, these are all in Arabic, so like translating in my head, High Council for the Unity of Azawad. Yeah. So HCUA is what we'll call them. They are one of the groups that makes up the CMA coalition. And that coalition is a signatory to the agreement. The HCUA and the MNLA,
More acronyms. We're like
more
the UN.
acronyms, I know. I'm just going to call them the MNLA because that's going to take me forever to remember. But the MNLA was the group that actually led the staking of Azawad. And they, at the time, had some ties with Al-Qaeda.
Okay.
There are suggestions that all ties have not been dropped, that they might still be working together, not on an official capacity, not on an official basis, but a lot of those fighters have relationships or have or family or simply friendships that have lasted throughout the years. So there are some suggestions that is still occurring. But Al-Qaeda is now part of a coalition known as JNIM, another acronym. JNIM and the Islamic State are both extremely present in Mali. And JNIM is that's part of the reason why we started this project earlier in the year. We want to track movements of JNIM because they've expanded. When I first came onto the project in 2018, they were really located in the northern part of Mali around Kidal, so northeast towards Algeria and Niger. And then they started moving, they started spreading, kind of following along the borders with Burkina Faso. Recently, there were, I guess last spring, there were a few attacks around Bamako, where they were moving closer to Mauritania, out towards Senegal, down toward Cote d'Ivoire. And that movement was striking. That was something that we hadn't noticed before, at least not regularly. And we were concerned it was becoming a pattern. So this kind of data work can help you show patterns of movement. And if we can establish patterns of movement, and several other variables hold true, then it's possible to say that there might be an area of control. And if there's an area of control, then what does that mean for the government, for the government's credibility, for their ability to govern? So there are a lot of groups that are tied to Al-Qaeda, especially because Al-Qaeda is part of JNIM now. And those groups, there's another group that's a part of the JNIM coalition called Katibat Messina. They are one of the biggest problems for our peace health work and for our health work in Mali at this point in time. The guinea worm and trachoma programs. They're extremely active. They have almost a control over the central Mali region, and they're very active and prohibitive for internationals to be able to come in and do any kind of humanitarian work. So that's the long answer. The short answer is yes.
I understand. So, Kate, Syria, I do have a question for you as well. So, Syria has largely dropped off the U.S. news. Does that mean that the government has succeeded in overcoming the rebels generally, or what is going on? Are there any U.S., EU sanctions having influence on government?
It's so funny because, yeah, I get this question a lot nowadays. When I meet new people, or even with my family, who is really sweet because they try to keep up with what's going on in Syria, and they'll be like, "So, is it still happening? Is this still a thing?" Yes, it actually is.
Okay.
There's still conflict. The government does control a majority of communities inside Syria now. And communities, when I say communities, I was referencing city, towns, villages inside Syria. We have about 8,000 communities mapped in Syria. And looking at recent areas of control, it's a little over 50% for the government. But there's still active conflict. There's an enclave in the northwest that is all controlled by armed groups that are also formerly Al-Qaeda aligned, but that allegedly still do have ties to Al-Qaeda, as well as even more hardline elements. And then Turkey is still present and active in Syria, a large swath of area. And then there's still Kurds in the northeast of Syria that the government has kind of an agreement with, does not control. So at the map of Syria cut in half. One side is controlled by mostly northeast by Kurds, and then a little bit of Turkey, and then the west side is controlled by Syria, and then a little bit of Turkey as well. So it's not whole, it's not completed. And also the drivers of the conflict, what started the conflict, have not been met. It's been a really largely military-led solution. And I hesitate to use that word solution, maybe a process. And we've seen that it's hard to even engage in an absence or maintain an absence of violence in areas that are controlled by the government, because the underlying causes are still there.
So with your Syria mapping project, does that keep external parties from accidentally attacking each other?
So we don't share with militaries.
Okay. Do you share with other organizations, individuals, journalism?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a time when we were helping update the State Department on what was going on, because there's just so much turnover that the people inheriting the Syria file had no idea who the armed groups were and what was going on. But while we have talked to U.S. military, for example, and other militaries, we don't share areas of control, because first of all, they should have it, and they don't, then they should be better at their jobs. So we share it really with humanitarians, NGO workers, and researchers. Because for my project, there's a portion of it that we will try to share publicly, so people understand what's going on, as well as for researchers, because I, in a very biased way, think that this is a very complex and fascinating project that has data on it. And as someone who has studied civil wars or intrastate conflict, there's very limited data on it, or available in the public sphere. So we do try to share that. But then there's an aspect and a portion of our data that we don't share, because it's collected from local sources that we have not received their approval, or there are implications of sharing the data publicly that does call out certain conflict actors, or could be used in a nefarious way. And we want this to eventually be public, but we're still trying to figure out how to do that safely. So right now it's just shared with key stakeholders.
So let me, I have a question from another one of our supporters, Ed Ward. What do the rebels see in Syria as the end game, their best case outcome? Is it realistic? If not, how does conflict resolution work in that situation?
Certainly. Yeah, so the rebels is a very large term, trying to encompass a lot of different factions. But let's say for those who are in opposition to the Syrian government, many are still saying Assad must go. And that's difficult. And the US recently put into effect sanctions. It's called the Caesar Act.
Mhm,
Is meant to put further pressure on the Syrian government
mhm,
and encourage behavior change or just make it so untenable for Assad that he will go.
mhm,
Unfortunately, this has been a tactic that has been used for the entire length of the conflict,
mhm,
and we've seen his position deepen and strengthen over time.
mhm,
So what we hear, while we still hear the Assad must go, our conflict resolution work engages with alternative approaches to a shift and a change. And we really try to focus on the Syrian people, right? So what does that mean to Syrian civilians when you say more sanctions and Assad must go and we won't stop until they leave? How does it affect the civilians that you claim to be supporting and fighting for? Also, um, what ways can we help support Syrian civilians and some type of, I don't want to say normalcy, but safety and security that maybe doesn't strengthen Assad or that provides more support for civilians and not as much for the Syrian central government. It's thinking about different ways to approach a really difficult scenario because there's no winning and we don't claim that there's going to be one winner, one loser. But getting others to think about what their interests are in a different way and get towards their needs. It's like what you always talk about in conflict resolution. Look at their interests, move from the interests to their needs. What really would help satisfy them? They're saying Assad must go, but what does that mean? What's underlying that? And it's a slow process and it's iterative. Lots of conversations and building that trust and hearing from others of what they want.
mhm. So, Kate Molly, I do have a question for you. The last election, did the Carter Center observe that election?
No, they did not.
Okay. All right. So, do you believe so? In your opinion, then, was it deemed a fair election?
There are a variety of opinions on that, but the EU and several other observers did observe those
Okay.
elections, and they said that it was credible.
Okay.
So that is typically the opinion that is that the Carter Center abides by as well.
And I think you guys didn't observe the election because you weren't invited. Is that right? Or you chose?
I'm not entirely sure. The election observation team would have been in the democracy program, so I'm not sure if they tried, honestly, or if because we already have so many projects happening from the Carter Center in Mali that could have complicated relations.
Yeah.
So maybe they didn't even reach out and try to observe.
Makes sense.
So, do you think what's currently going on right now will help resolve the disputes in the northern regions?
They're two entirely different conflicts.
Okay.
So Mali has at least 3 conflicts that are happening right now. There's the northern conflict, which has been the conflict that has repeated itself in the 1960s, the 90s, in 2012, 2009, 2012. I mean, it's or 2005 and 2012. It keeps coming back. The population in northern Mali, they want independence. The borders of Mali were drawn fairly ambiguously during colonization, and entire groups were split up. And the basis of their want for their own land is that they are a different, not only a different ethnic group, but also that the government and the groups who are in power in Bamako are not sending resources up to the north. The school, the education, the healthcare, infrastructure It's never been in the north what it is in Bamako. And so why not have an independent region that they can govern, that just makes sense for those people, for that group of people. And so that this was the fourth rebellion for the same reasons that's happened since independence. The current coup and the current crisis that's happening in Bamako, yes, it's related to an extent. There are still the same, there are economic grievances, there are social grievances. Teachers have been protesting for months, years even. But there's still a difference. So even if, I think, in my opinion, it depends on if a unity government can be put in place, a real unity government. And by that, I mean a government that includes representation from all of the parties. I'm talking people in the northern regions, people in the southern regions, people from Bamako, people from the opposition and the majority party, even people from some of the armed groups. Mali's currently in a process of trying to reintegrate some of the ex-combatants into the military. And those leaders, the leaders of the CMA have been fairly successfully governing the Kidal region in Mali for years now. They stand up for their people and try to govern fairly in Kidal. So including that kind of representation where everyone's voices can be heard might actually address all three conflicts. It would at least be a step in the right direction.
Awesome. So ladies, before we wrap up here, what I do want to ask both of you, your projects are innovative. So what does success look like for them?
Yeah, if I can go first, sorry.
So Kate, Syria, take it away.
Just quickly, innovation to me does not equal success. And I think that's something that we constantly have to push back against a little bit. It's like, oh, you're being innovative, so then you're going to be successful. It's like, no, we'll probably just fail in a different way, or try in a different way. Success to me, though, is convening and bringing together stakeholders who aren't normally talking and or discussing key topics that are usually avoided. So using our data as an anchor, using our name as a convener, and helping build a relationship among people who can help shift the thinking and approaches and what's going on in Syria. So that's success. I'd also like to say end of violence in Syria, but that's more of a goal that I don't know if I can.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
How about you?
And Kate, Molly?
So our overarching goal for our project is to advance the implementation of the peace agreement through increased accountability. We have been doing that. We have created, I believe, 66 recommendations at this point in time. Almost half of them have been at least partially implemented. So steps are being taken towards implementation, and that's something that we are we're monitoring and trying to evaluate every few months. So advancing implementation of the agreement is what we were mandated to do, and we are hopeful that that it will continue.
Awesome. So I do have one last question before we go. As impartial third parties, how do you get past conflict participants' initial demands to understand what their real requirements are for an agreement?
So
Go ahead.
what you're you're describing is what I studied in conflict resolution.
Yes.
That's what happens in any type of political dialogue. That's why our workshops and our dialogue meetings span more than just one day, because the first session, the first 3 hours is for people to grandstand, you can say that, or just really to share what are their positions, like what are they angry about, what do they want you to know that they care about, and you let out that frustration, and then after you've had time to let it out, you have a coffee break, chat, you have a little food, and you come back and start, the moderator starts asking, or the facilitator starts asking questions, and you start kind of piecing things out. So it's a slow process that builds upon each session. How about you?
Yeah, for us, so I mean, our process is a little further along. We actually have a peace agreement in place.
Yeah.
So we're no longer really negotiating. At times, some of the parties do come to the table and make kind of grand statements that, well, this needs to happen before I'm able to do this thing. And trying to break down, like Kate was saying, trying to create better relations and break down some of those responses that probably come from some combination of pride and fear that the other group won't actually do their part. Just having those conversations, improving relationships, and trying to break down some of the tensions between groups is the opportunity that we're trying to take with our project. That doesn't really happen very much anymore, though. Very frequently with DDR, with the disarmament process, but less so with other items. The negotiations in Mali finished with the signing of the peace agreement.
All right. Well, ladies, this has been a pleasure for me. I want to thank both of you for joining us today. I know that our supporters have definitely enjoyed this. So that concludes our program for today. On behalf of the Ambassador Circle team, again, I would like to thank Kate and Kate for joining us, as well as our Carter Center guests. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us or call us. You can find that contact information in the chat room, as well as resources and links that they shared with us today. We would appreciate your feedback or suggestions on any of our future events. Also, be on the lookout for an invitation to our next virtual event, as we're planning a conversation related to our election work for early October. Thank you so much for your support. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you soon.
Guys,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sa sa wa ni Don't